considered one of the most secretive and superior special forces units in the world. The Spetsnaz are the primary elite forces of the Russian military, focusing on political warfare operations that involve reconnaissance, sabotage from behind enemy lines, and counterinsurgency. They are controlled by the Federal Security Service and shrouded in myth, rumour, and mystery. Today we will explore the strengths and history of the Russian Special Forces, the Spetsnaz. But first, I'm excited to introduce you to today's sponsor, REC Watches. REC Watches are crafting time from history. With the motto of recover, recycle, reclaim, they create unique watches crafted from historical machines. Their past projects include watches with materials from World War II Spitfire aircraft, SR-71 Blackbird aircraft, Carroll Shelby's experimental Mustangs, Ayrton Senna's Lotus 98T Formula One car, and Steve McQueen's TR6 Triumph motorcycle from the iconic film The Great Escape, just to name a few. They source original parts from salvaged, surplus, or otherwise unusable materials, preserving the legacy of these iconic machines and allowing the owner of these watches to wear a piece of history on their wrist. Each watch is fully unique and exclusive, thanks to the distinct patina from repurposed materials and the availability of parts from each donor machine. REC Watch's core concept involves integrating authentic pieces of automotive, aircraft, and motorcycle history into each and every watch, allowing enthusiasts and collectors to own a tangible piece of the past. Each watch is Swiss-made to the highest standards, designed entirely in-house, and is a premium timepiece in its own right, historic DNA aside. And now I want to tell you about one of the incredibly exciting watches that they have on sale at the moment. They have watches made with aluminium from Mk-1A Spitfire aircraft X4009. This aircraft participated in the Battle of Britain, with Australian fighter pilot Patterson Clarence Hughes at the controls. Pat Hughes is recognised as an ace of aces from the Battle of Britain and Australia's most decorated pilot from this historical event. After achieving 17 victories, Pat Hughes, an X4009, was eventually shot down on September 7, 1940. The X4009 aircraft was recovered in the UK as a complete wreck and has since been transferred to the custody of charity organisation HFC, the Hunter Fighter Collection, based in Australia. HFC aims to completely restore the aircraft to its original condition, and the story and rarity of this Mk-1A makes it one of the most, if not the most, significant Spitfire restorations in the world. But it gets even better. REC Watches have given us the incredible opportunity to provide our audience with a 15% discount by using the code WARSOFTHEWORLD at checkout. They're an incredible company, making sure to preserve these important historical artifacts and allowing you to own a piece of it yourself. And now for today's video. Welcome to Wars of the World. The Spetsnaz, which means of special purpose or of special designation, are not the only elite unit in Russia's military, but they are considered the best. Unlike special forces in the West, however, these troops are not considered special for their skills as individuals, rather that they are carrying out special tasks. According to Mark Galeotti, historian and author of Putin's Wars from Chechnya to Ukraine, the Spetsnaz have their roots in the Cold War, when they were sent behind NATO lines to target nuclear weapons and command centers. Though at the time many members were recent conscripts, Spetsnaz members were required to take on all sorts of roles, far beyond those of any other Soviet unit. They had to be observational, stealthy, able to carry themselves in combat, and able to adapt. One Spetsnaz veteran told Galeotti, quote, "Precision and silence beat strength and courage any day," the veteran adding, "Courage is the willingness to die trying to reach the objective. Determination is the will to find a way to get there without dying." End quote. Galeotti describes the main job of the Spetsnaz as scouts and saboteurs. In much the same way as they had in the Cold War, these troops are often sent behind the lines to gather intelligence and survey, disrupt lines of supply, and carry out other operations against enemy chains of command. Over the decades, the Spetsnaz has stopped Soviet shipping in Angola from being destroyed, helped suppress the Hungary uprising against the Soviets in the 1956 revolution, and similarly dampened uprising efforts during the Prague Spring in 1968. The reputation of all Spetsnaz is that they are the toughest and most ruthless soldiers in the world. Recruits have to meet several requirements, though it is all basic stuff. To be at least 5 foot and 2 inches tall, to weigh between 11 and 12 stone, or 165 to 175 pounds, to be physically fit and healthy and with good eyesight. Reportedly, the selection process for such units is particularly grueling, when training can last as long as 5 years. Recruits, who are sometimes hand-picked from the regular military, are subjected to a horrifically brutal 5-month-long induction upon first joining. The difficult process aims to prepare troops and instill the resilience needed to endure the difficult conditions that they will likely face. And it involves tasks such as marching over 18 miles while carrying a 4-stone or 66-pound load. Members of the Naval Spetsnaz, meanwhile, must also prove that they can swim through a horrendously narrow space, similar to that of a torpedo tube, and in another demonstration, dive underwater, remove their mask until water has filled it, and then replace the mask and bleed the water from the helmet using a special valve before returning to the surface. This particular task is said to be so demanding that recruits are allowed 2 opportunities to complete it before they're deemed to have failed. Once the tests have been passed, Spetsnaz members must adhere to a taxing fitness regime. They also have regular hand-to-hand combat sessions, train with a vast array of weapons, from knives to assault rifles, and become familiar with the various vehicles that they are allowed to use, from quad bikes to army-issued IFVs. Surprisingly, not all Spetsnaz are parachute trained, only about 1/3 of them are. Naval Spetsnaz members also receive further training for missions that they are expected to carry out on the water. Beyond the Spetsnaz as a whole are numerous different units, such as Alpha Group, Vega, and Fackel, to name a few. In 2002, the Alpha unit alone consisted of between 1,500 and 2,000 men, and its troops were trained for armed response and intelligence gathering operations. Notably, Alpha Group is one of the oldest units, created in 1974 by the Soviet KGB on the back of the Munich massacre, a terrorist attack that occurred in Munich during the 1972 Summer Olympics. During the assault, 2 members of the Israeli Olympic team were killed, while 9 others were taken hostage and ultimately executed. 8 members of Black September, a Palestinian militant group, were responsible for the crime, and as a result of it, many European countries created specialized counter-terrorism units. Though little is known about the exact duties of Alpha Group, there is some speculation that it is operated by Russia's top political leadership. Another specialist group for the Spetsnaz is Vega Group, and it runs similarly, with Vega often orchestrating covert operations both in and out of Russia. Some known missions of Alpha Group involve the shooting of Yuri Vlasenko in 1979, a Soviet Ukrainian who demanded that he be given asylum in the US, while in 1983, Alpha Group put a stop to the hijacking of Aeroloft Flight 6833 in Soviet Georgia. Throughout much of the 1980s, the unit was frequently sent to try and defuse hostage situations in Russia, including 2 separate cases where an entire building was taken over. Alpha Group was also part of Storm 333, or the Tajberg Palace Assault, a military raid carried out in Afghanistan in 1979 by the Soviet Union. Several special forces groups entered the building and assassinated Afghan leader Hafizullah Amin, as well as his family. Alpha Group members were dressed in Afghan uniforms and were reported to have carried out their mission remarkably well, suffering only 2 losses, the smallest number of casualties within the operation. In the 1990s, Alpha Group was part of the botched Soviet coup attempt after its commanding officer was told by the KGB chairman to forcibly enter the Russian White House to execute Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russian SFSR. During the 1990s, the Spetsnaz as a whole suffered some difficulties when officials began struggling to find, recruit, and to keep good soldiers. Low stagnant wages, poor working conditions, and corruption led some to leave in favor of a life of crime, entrepreneurship, or even politics. Members of Alpha Group, for example, set up a bodyguard business where there were allegations that many disgruntled Spetsnaz members started moonlighting for the mafia. In 1993, a young investigative reporter named Dmitry Kolodov began looking into the accusations of corruption in the military, including concerns that funds that were meant to resettle 500,000 Soviet troops based in East Germany had been misappropriated. However, in October of 1994, Dmitry was murdered after he opened a briefcase that had been tampered with. He'd been told that the briefcase contained evidence that supported the allegations he was investigating, but instead, he was met with an explosive blast that took his life. The military denied involvement, and while 6 defendants, 4 of which were serving military officers, were tried for murder in 2002 and again in 2004, they were acquitted on both occasions. No one has ever been convicted of the murder of Dmitry. Nevertheless, the Spetsnaz fared much better under Vladimir Putin's government. In late 1999, they became instrumental to Russia's success during the Second Chechen War, participating in a myriad of counterinsurgency and counter-terrorism operations. They assassinated separatist leaders, including Aslan Maskhadov, the 3rd president of the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, as well as his successor, Abdul Halim Sadullayev, and Sulim Yamadeyev, a Chechen military commander, among many others. Alpha and Vega groups, as well as other members of the Spetsnaz, were then thrust into the spotlight during the 2002 Moscow theater hostage crisis, which occurred at Dubrovka Theater on October 23rd. During the incident, 40 to 50 Chechens took 850 people hostage and demanded that Russian forces withdraw from Chechnya in a bid to end the Second Chechen War. Intelligence revealed that special forces would have to make their way through 30 meters of corridor and climb a staircase before reaching the area in which the hostages were contained, and the building was crawling with Chechens who were armed with explosives. The most dangerous of all of these devices, however, was one placed in the center of the auditorium. If detonated, it would collapse the ceiling and likely kill, or at the very least severely injure, around 80% of those inside the building. 200 members of the Spetsnaz were present at the scene and carried out the siege against the Chechens, which lasted over 2 days. Early on the morning of October 26th, Alpha and Vega troops, among others, stormed the theater. They were masked and heavily armed, with the Russian Deputy Interior Minister later claiming that the plan had been accelerated after they caught wind that 2 hostages had been killed. An aerosol anesthetic, which was initially believed by the remaining hostages to be smoke from a fire, was pumped into the building through the ventilation system. The gas, however, served to do nothing but cause panic within the auditorium. One hostage even managed to contact a local radio station and begged for the government not to gas them. Some Chechens were equipped with their own gas masks and subsequently responded to the attack by firing blindly at the Russians outside. 30 minutes later, once the gas was believed to have taken effect, the Spetsnaz raided the building. 2 members of Alpha Group were later overcome by the anesthetic. After 90 minutes of gunfire, the Spetsnaz finally forced their way inside the auditorium and killed the bulk of the hostage takers. Though initial reports stated that 2 had escaped and around 5 had been arrested, the Russian government later declared that all of them had been killed. Alpha Group soldiers later reported that the hostage response was, quote, "our first successful operation in years," end quote. And though the operation was a success in some ways, Russian forces were severely criticized for their heavy-handedness. 132 hostages were killed in the attack, and over 700 were injured. Reflecting on the situation, historian Mark Galeotti noted, quote, "Unfortunately, it appears that rescuing hostages came second in priority to killing the terrorists. He also told the BBC, "Tactically, this scenario is very difficult, but they made a mistake in going in the first place, believing the Chechen forces had started to execute hostages. They ought to have known exactly what was going on inside before they did anything." End quote. The Spetsnaz were also part of the group that responded to the Beslan school siege, which started on September 1st, 2004. Over the course of 3 days, 1,100 people, including over 700 children, were taken hostage by members of the Ryadus Salekin battalion, who were commanded by Chechen separatist Shamil Basayev. Basayev demanded that Chechnya be recognized as an independent country and that Russian troops must withdraw. The attacking group was armed when it stormed school number 1 in the town of Beslan, herding most people, those who weren't killed in the initial chaos, into the gymnasium, which had been rigged with explosive devices. Responding to the scene were the Alpha and Vega groups once again, along with Russian police, internal troops, army forces, and special military police. The attack would ultimately result in the deaths of over 330 individuals, the vast majority of them being children, and the fact that school children had been targeted by the hostage takers greatly disturbed not just the Russian public, but the rest of the world. Many of those who perished in the siege had done so following explosions, fires, or during the ensuing gunfire. Official reports on how many members of the Spetsnaz died at the scene are varied. Some claim just 11, others more than 20, but it was confirmed that 3 commanding officers were killed, including Colonel Oleg Ilvin, Vega's Lieutenant Colonel Dmitry Razumovsky, and Alpha's Major Alexander Perov. Those responsible for the incident were all eventually killed, except for one individual, Nurpashi Kuliev, who escaped and was almost lynched before he was arrested by authorities. In 2006, he was convicted on counts of terrorism, hostage-taking, and murder, and sentenced to life behind bars. The result of this siege was that Putin introduced new counter-terrorism measures, which made great changes to Russia's political system. He proposed that regional governors, like those in North Ossetia, where the school massacre occurred, and Chechnya, be appointed by the president and endorsed by regional legislators, though Putin retains the power to dissolve those legislators if his nominations were rejected more than twice. Still, his proposal passed with an overwhelming majority. Though, as with the theatre massacre, Russian forces and its government were criticized for their handling of the Beslan school siege, a 2006 report absolved them of any blame. Notably, details from this report were said to contradict those of witnesses, while survivors and the family members of victims labeled the official version of events published as nothing more than a cover-up. 350 survivors and families brought a civil lawsuit to the Russian government in the European Court of Human Rights in November of 2007, while 55 more filed a suit in 2011. In 2017, the court determined that the Russian authorities had, in fact, failed on several levels, and $3.1 million were awarded in damages. The court concluded that Russian officials had ignored intelligence that an attack on the school was coming, and that the weapons used by the military forces were excessive and unnecessary in a hostage situation. Such weapons included flamethrowers, grenade launchers, and anti-tank rockets. Russian officials responded by claiming that the findings of the court were utterly unacceptable. In more recent years, the Spetsnaz was believed to have 17,000 members, a number which still includes conscripted individuals, although the special forces select only the best of the best to join them, many of whom have advantages, such as being talented athletes or graduates of military training programs for youths. In 2023, however, reports began to emerge that Spetsnaz forces had been gutted due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which began 2 years earlier. Leaked US documents revealed that it will likely take Russia years to rebuild its special forces to where they had been before the invasion. US officials claimed that their assessments were the result of their observations that Russian commanders tend to over-rely on specialized units, which had been used as part of frontline infantry formations. These formations, however, have suffered casualty after casualty. Those Spetsnaz members are supposed to be used for slicker, more high-risk missions. This was reportedly thrown out the window at the beginning of the invasion, when senior commanders began to doubt the abilities of regular troops and implemented the special forces instead. This led to a quick expenditure of such units. Among the leaked material were photographs of a base used by the 22nd Separate Spetsnaz Brigade, which showed that, quote, all but one of 5 Russian separate Spetsnaz brigades that returned from combat operations in Ukraine in late summer of 2022 suffered significant losses. End quote. The images show the difference between the base in November 2021 versus November 2022. In 2021, the base is full of vehicles, while the following year there are less than half the vehicles remaining. The Washington Post noted that not only have Russia's special forces, along with their resources, depleted, but so has their experience. Most Spetsnaz troops are required to undergo 4 years of specialized training, which is perhaps why it will take so long for the country to rebuild these units. Although it's unknown how many Spetsnaz soldiers have been killed since the invasion began, the 346th unit alone is said to have only 125 of its 900 personnel active. Russia military expert and senior fellow with the Foreign Policy Research Institute, Rob Lee, commented that Russia's strategy of pushing elite units to the front lines has had immediate consequences, as commanders have done nothing but burn through their best fighters just a year into their invasion.